What's going on, guys, and welcome to another video. I'm starting a new series called The Foundations of Movement. The goal of this is to share information with you and to educate about your body. If you don't understand how your body can be placed in space, you cannot make your training as safe as possible. Today we will be talking about the pelvis, episode 1. The pelvis, super important subject. Every single core exercise involves a pelvic placement that can make that core exercise really good for you or really bad for you. And that's why I decided to talk about the pelvis first. So let's not waste any more time and get you some great knowledge. So first of all, we're going to talk about pelvic tilts. If you imagine your pelvis being a glass of water, a very simple, flat, balanced glass of water, that's your neutral alignment. Now, if you want to tilt this glass forward and you want to pour the water forward, that's where you're going to have an anterior pelvic tilt. So your lower back is going to arch slightly and your pelvis are going to tilt forward. The opposite of that is pouring the water backward, tilting that glass backward. That's what's called a posterior pelvic tilt. So now that you know these two positions, let's try to rock back and forth in between them. So hands in front, take a breath in, anteriorly tilt your pelvis. Take a breath out, posteriorly tilt your pelvis. And again, breathe in, anteriorly tilt your pelvis. Breathe out, posteriorly tilt your pelvis. Just one more, anteriorly tilt your pelvis. Posteriorly tilt your pelvis. Now, as you do this, try to isolate your pelvis. So you shouldn't have your upper back mirroring the movement of your pelvis, okay? So if you're tilting forward, your chest doesn't stick up, but actually it stays neutral, okay? So we have neutral in the middle, anterior pelvic tilt, pouring the water forward, posterior tilt, pouring the water back. Now that you know these basic alignments, we can start practicing in different shapes. And the first shape we're going to practice in is going to be on all fours. Here we go, on all fours position. Try to keep your shoulders above the wrists, the hips above the knees. Start in a neutral alignment. And we begin tilting the pelvis forward into an anterior tilt, feeling a good arch in your lower back, and then tilting the pelvis backwards into a posterior tilt. Don't round the upper back, keep it neutral, okay? Just pelvis. Again, neutral and anterior pelvic tilt. You want to breathe in here. Neutral, posterior tilt. Make sure you really know these three positions. Neutral, anterior pelvic tilt, that's the last one. Neutral, posterior pelvic tilt. And release. Perfect. So if this is easy, we're gonna get harder now. So you just bring your knees a little bit further away, keep your shoulders over the wrists, and that requires a little bit more core activation. So this is called half plank. Let's try this out. So from this half plank, anterior pelvic tilt. Some of you should already feel some compression in the lower back. Don't push it. Just try to experience the position, but don't push it. Back to neutral. Posterior pelvic tilt. And again, neutral, anterior pelvic tilt, neutral, posterior pelvic tilt. Squeezing those glutes, tilting the pelvis back. Neutral, anterior pelvic tilt, neutral, posterior pelvic tilt. And release. Now, you should have noticed that the more we bring the legs further away, the harder it is to control your pelvis. That's great. That's great pelvic training. So now we're going to try from a plank position. If you know that your lower back is already fragile, just watch and practice the half plank position until you build enough strength and awareness to be able to do it with the knees off the floor. So let's just try. Plank position, just like that, nice and strong. We are in a neutral alignment and we go anteriorly tilting the pelvis, feeling a compression in the lower back. We don't want that. Neutral, posterior pelvic tilt. And again, neutral, anterior pelvic tilt. Compressing the lower back, neutral, posterior pelvic tilt. And then we're just experiencing the positions, but very rarely I would advise to have an anterior pelvic tilt during a plank. Okay, so either neutral or posterior pelvic tilt. I'm going to give all my recommendation after we practiced in different shapes, so you can understand for every exercise which pelvic position I advise. So the next position we're going to try is supine position, with your legs, with your knees bent. That's the most common one. So feel your pelvis relax on the floor. We are in a neutral position and we go anterior tilt, posterior, 1, anterior tilt, posterior tilt, 2, anterior tilt, posterior tilt, 3. Now try with your legs off the floor. So you're gonna lift your legs up in the air, keep your knees above the hips, and try this out. So we're gonna go into an anterior tilt, lower back lifts off the floor, posterior tilt, lower back is pressed on the floor, anterior tilt, posterior tilt, anterior tilt, and posterior tilt. Perfect. So now that you can feel this position in all these different shapes, let's just try one more, the last one. So you go in a half kneeling position, just like this, and practice it. So here's your pelvis. You're going to go anteriorly tilting, posteriorly tilting, anteriorly tilting, posteriorly tilting. Squeezing your glutes is going to help you to feel that posterior tilt. Anterior tilt, belly out, posterior tilt. Squeeze your bum, belly in, draw in from the bottom up. One more, anterior tilt, posterior tilt. If you're doing this properly, you should already feel a nice hip flexor stretch. So now that we understand how to place our pelvis in all these different shapes, I'm gonna give you some recommendations, and I divided every single group of exercises in one sort of category so you can better understand how to place your pelvis. Let's get it. Okay, hip flexor and quadriceps. Let's start with the most common one. You grab your leg, you pull it in, and you don't feel anything because your pelvis is either in neutral or in an anterior tilted position. If you grab the foot with both hands and you adjust your pelvis into a posterior tilt, remember to squeeze your glutes, thrust your hip forward as you create that posterior tilt, tilting the pelvis backwards. You should already feel a massive stretch in your hip flexor and quads, and that's what we want. Okay, the second most common example is the classic hip flexor stretch. Legs forward and you stretch your hip like this. Now, before you sink in the position, guys, posteriorly tilt your pelvis and then sink. You will lose a little bit of that posterior tilt, but it doesn't matter. Just the act that you're trying to posteriorly tilt is gonna create a much better stretch. The third example is the evolution of this stretch. I see it all the time in classes where you grab your back leg, you pull it in, and instead of just popping your belly out and lifting your chest, you do the opposite. Sternum in, posterior tilt, and that's really, even if you back off from the stretch a little bit. That's really gonna get the quad much more. Forward bending and hamstrings flexibility. Let's start with the most common one, the forward fold. The feet are gonna be together. Usually you tuck and you go like this, trying to stretch your toes. This is not really going to stretch your hamstrings, but mostly your lower back. So if you start in an anterior tilt and you go down, hinging at the hips, and you keep the anterior tilt as far as possible, and then you can fold down like this or like this, but you try to really tilt the pelvis anteriorly. I know it's hard, but try to really send those sit bones up. That's gonna massively create a big stretch in your hamstrings. Much better than this rounded shape here. The second example for the hamstrings is the classic hamstring stretch. One leg forward, we tuck, and we go like this with a rounded back. Now, while this might stretch you a little bit, is not very effective. So if you just try this, you bend the knee slightly, you tilt your pelvis anteriorly, hinge forward just like the forward fold until you can keep that anteriorly tilted pelvis, and then you put your fingers on the floor and your rib cage can cave in a little bit, no problem, but your pelvis is tilting anteriorly. That's gonna really create a massive difference. And the third example, we're not gonna talk hamstrings because it's the same thing, but glutes. How many of you have done the classic pigeon pose? You see these all the time, just like this, maybe even rounding like that. Now, while that can be relaxing, if you wanna get that outer hip area, if you wanna get here, what you should try to do is stay upright and tilt your pelvis anteriorly. Just this little pelvic tilt here will really get that outer, I'm feeling it, will really get that outer thigh big time. This category is where people commonly get injured, okay? Abdominal exercises from a supine position. So if, for example, you're doing leg lifts like this, you want to keep your pelvis either neutral or posteriorly tilted to be even safer. The legs, when they lower, they act as a counterbalance, so you don't want to let the legs pull your pelvis into an anterior tilt, destroying your back, and then you pull them back up like this. Keep the neutral while you lower the leg. Just go as low as you can keep the neutral, all the posterior tilt, even better, and then pull the legs up. Same thing for all the crisscross, this sort of, try to keep it neutral pelvis. Posteriorly tilted is also good, but for all this core, you don't want to end up into an arch. Let's say you're doing these tuck-ups, for example, very common exercise. So you don't want to let your pelvis arch, especially here. So arch and then go up. So when you lengthen, keep it neutral and then close. Keep it neutral and close. Here, don't let it pop out. And even if I said before, the same applies to your plank, guys. So all core exercises from a support position. So push-ups, side planks, everything that requires your body to fight gravity from this position. You don't want to end up in an anterior tilt, either neutral or posterior tilt. Bridges, hip thrusts, they all finish in a posterior pelvic tilt. You don't want to work lower back extension, you want to work hip extension. And that's why when you do your bridges, you want to go as high as you can keep a nice posteriorly pelvic tilt. So tuck, go as high as you feel the pelvic tilt. When you want to go higher, your pelvis is going to arch, is going to let you go higher, but that's not your hip extension. That's your lumbar extension that gets you there. So you don't really need this extra stress in your spine. So even if you go low, keep a good pelvic alignment, and you're gonna be safe. Especially when you do the single leg ones. For example, here. That's a good pelvic alignment. If I go any higher, I start to arch from here. And I don't need to end up here. And the same rule applies, guys, when you do your hip thrusts. Go as high as you can, keep that tilt in your pelvis. Any higher than that, it's your lower back. So a little bit lower, tilt your pelvis, squeeze your bum, and that's gonna keep you safe and strong. Last but not least, leg training. Now guys, when you do squats, you want to maintain a neutral pelvic alignment. If you are one of those people who like me, who like to just rest in a deep squat like this and just chill out, move side to side, and the back is rounded, there is nothing wrong with rounding the back in a deep squat like this. But if you have a barbell in your back that is pushing down, you want to go down as slow as you can keep a neutral alignment. Let me explain. So there is this barbell in your back, you're gonna go down in your squat, pelvis is neutral, neutral, neutral. Now, depending on your mobility, some of you will already tuck under, but let's say you're kind of mobile, you can get your bum below your knees, your pelvis is neutral, everything is looking great. Now, when you feel that this is starting to happen with a barbell in your back here, you definitely don't want to get to this bottom position with the barbell pushing down in your vertebrae. So go as low as you can keep neutral. Okay, 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 okay. Don't go any lower than this. Explosively come out of that squat. That's my recommendation. Work on your mobility if you want to get all the way down with a barbell in your back. As far as lunges, I will explain better at the end, but during unilateral movement, your pelvis actually behave differently. So let's just say we want to keep the pelvis neutral. So when you do your lunges, you don't want to arch and go down like this, or tuck and go down like this, but also you want to try and maintain a neutral alignment. So down straight and up straight. Okay, we're finished with pelvic tilting, but now we're gonna talk about pelvic hiking. So because the pelvis joins with the sacrum, but actually we have two sides of this pelvis that behave a little bit differently from one another. So one side of the pelvis can actually elevate in comparison to the other, can become a little bit higher, and it can also become depressed relative to the other. So the best exercise to feel this is if you just step on a couple of yoga bricks, or if you just step on an elevated surface, just like this. You want to keep that knee locked, the hips are even, and you're gonna drop deep one leg, getting into a nice stretch down. Feel this pelvic hiking while you feel this pelvis depressing down. And then from here, you drive the foot into those bricks and you hike the other pelvis. So now this pelvis is a little higher than this one. And again, reaching down, feeling a good stretch, driving the foot into the bricks, hiking the other pelvis. That's a brilliant exercise to teach hip stability, to improve gait mechanics, to improve with single leg balance. So this is definitely a great one to go for. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk to you about is these pelvic biomechanics. So we said that in unilateral movement, the pelvis behave differently compared to the other side. So I'm gonna play a little video now, and you can see, if you observe the skeleton in the middle particularly, you can see how when it lands, the pelvis that lands tilts anteriorly, while the pelvis that is about to step forward tilts posteriorly. So this sort of contralateral movement is very important, and that's what happens when we walk or run. The best way to feel this, I'm gonna show you a beautiful exercise that is also great sacroiliac mobilization. You lie on your back, your knees are above the hips, your knees also are a little bit more open than 90 degrees. Grab a foam roller and bring it in between your knees and squeeze. From here, you want to tuck your tailbone and you want to lift your bum off the floor slightly, not too much. And then from here, you can sort of understand that pelvic mechanic. So look, this leg drops down and this knee goes up without deviating like this. It's just a little movement. We don't have a lot of range of motion here. Then you go back to central and then you go again. One leg goes down while this knee reaches up. You should feel your adductor working. So this is an excellent sacroiliac joint mobilization. It will get your adductor firing hard. It will mobilize your pelvis in a great and useful way. So I recommend you do not move side to side like this. Keep the knee straight in lines and mobilize your pelvis nicely with this beautiful movement. Okay, that's it for today, guys. I hope the information I shared with you are clear. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments down below. Please, if you found the video useful, share it with a friend, subscribe, and also like the video to help me spread good tips and spread the informations about our body that we all so badly need. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.